The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Remember that show back then? Remember that show? Turn on the TV, time was always flying. Why did they have to end? So many shows you forgotten. Now that we've got a podcast, we can release all the shows from our hands. Yeah, will you be the most TV dudes you'll ever listen to? As long as we keep on talking sitcoms and cartoons from back in the day. Okay, we confess, we're obsessed, but we got a podcast to help you remember that show.
Hey there, TV lovers, and welcome to episode 13 of Remember That Show, the podcast where we revisit the obscure or forgotten TV shows of the 80s and 90s. I'm William Bruce West.
And I'm Adam Pope, and we have just one question for you listeners. Are you ready to laugh at potentially questionable sketch comedy from the 90s? We are! But before we do, we're gonna laugh at our own childhood experiences in front of the TV in a segment we call Theme Song. So, Will, this is something we've kind of talked about before. I know you are a big Saturday Night Live fan. You're a devotee. But was SNL your introduction to the world of sketch comedy, or did you discover the tradition, let's say, of wacky characters and short comedic scenes in a different way?
This is going to sound weird because people don't ever believe me when I say this, but I actually was introduced to like the sketch comedy variety kind of deal from the Carol Burnett show. I have always had a TV. My mom always boasts that there was a TV in my room when I came home from the hospital. Like, I was raised on TV, and I have a distinct memory of being in a crib watching the Carol Burnett show on my black and white TV. But at the time, I didn't know it was Carol Burnett because I have no brain. I have no concept of the world. But the thing that always stuck with me was the face of Harvey Korman. So I lived my life up until probably the age of 10, not knowing this man's name, but I felt this spiritual connection to him. And I could never describe him to anybody. We didn't have Google. We didn't have anything like that. But it's like, it's that guy. He does like funny stuff. Sometimes he does Mel Brooks movies, but he's not like really famous. And sometimes he's with Tim Conway. And then people start really, oh, Harvey Korman. And I was like, that's his name? So it's like my introduction to sketch comedy and the like is the Carol Burnett show. But my like era of actually being cognizant of it was SNL. I started watching SNL probably around like 87 because like I've never had a bedtime, and older single mom who was the opposite of a helicopter parent. I guess she's like a foxhole parent. She did not care. So like, I was watching probably about 87. And I guess the earliest memories are like the Toonces era. He's the cat that drives the car that drives off the cliff and that kind of thing. But like, I've watched SNL most of my life. How about you?
Well, it's interesting, yeah, because like I think everybody thinks, oh, well, Saturday Night Live is the biggest. It's the thing everybody's gonna, cut their teeth on. But I remember seeing reruns of the 60s sketch comedy variety show Laugh-In on Nick at Night long before I ever set eyes on Saturday Night Live. So I'd have to say that was definitely the beginning. I remember Carol Burnett like reruns that would be on every once in a while, but it wasn't something I connected to until I realized, oh, Mama's Family came from the Carol Burnett show. And I was like, that's crazy. But the thing is too, like when it came to Saturday Night Live, like I definitely saw Wayne's World in theaters without knowing it was based on an SNL sketch. I didn't know what Saturday Night Live was still, even in the early 90s. But I remember I was watching a rerun of a classic, Saturday Night Live episode during the summer while I was sleeping over at my friend Colin's house, who's the friend I went to see Wayne's World with. And that's where I first saw Chris Farley as Matt Foley, the motivational speaker sketch. And that changed my world because I was like 11 years old at the time. And from then on, I was staying up late to watch SNL if I could. I have very bad stamina for late nights. I couldn't do it. But during daylight hours, I would watch the best of SNL VHS tapes that I bought from Suncoast Motion Picture Company at the mall. I mean, they were pretty cheap tapes, like just like even what they were made of. It wasn't good quality, but like I was catching up on all those years I had missed. And same thing, like the SNL alumni were everywhere. So like I saw Adam Sandler in his movies. I loved his comedy albums, but I never saw him on the show except on those tapes, right? But then I started like really getting into it. Like in junior high, I was recording tons of original sketches with my friends on our family camcorder. I'm doing comedy skits on audio cassette like Sandler. Like SNL did become like the core of it for me. I am curious though, because they always say the best era of SNL is when you were in high school. And I agree, because the my golden era of SNL, it's the late 90s. So it's Will Ferrell, who actually went to my high school in the 80s, Sherry O'Terry, Molly Shannon, Anna Gasteyer, Daryl Hammond, Mark McKinney, who I didn't know was from Kids in the Hall, Jim Brewer, his short run, and of course, Norm Macdonald. Like Norm was the guy for me. I used Norm's Bob Dole impression to get votes when I was running for student government in my speech and stuff. And I gained notoriety my freshman year for writing and performing my own version of the Matt Foley sketch at a talent show. And so like that was huge for me. I have a little bit more to add, but I am curious for you, who is your like golden era cast?
See, I always kind of like book convention there. I feel the same about SNL as I do The Simpsons, which is the opposite of everyone else. Everyone else is like, oh, it's not good anymore. It sucks, blah, blah, blah. Both shows, I watch a new episode and it's entertaining to me. Like even The Simpsons, like I stopped watching in college. So now I have 20 years of episodes that are new to me. So like it's still good to me. It's just we've changed. And the same with SNL. I guess my formative years were that like changing of the guard in 94 with Will Ferrell and O'Terry and Shannon. But like I still watch it religiously now. Like I critique it more. Like before it was kind of like, oh, that didn't work for me, but then there'd be something else. But now it's more about like the live tweet experience and like, does somebody in Kansas feel the same way about that sketch that I did? So like it's more interactive, but I have loved every era. They all have highs and lows, but I will say that, and this is like sacrilegious to most people, I hate the first cast. Like, I hate where the show started. The not ready for primetime players, those people mean nothing to me. Like, I know they went on to become, like, huge stars, but, like, I don't know a ton of Belushi work. I really don't like Bill Murray. We might talk about that one day, but it's like, he's gotten to this age where he does all this stuff where we write it off as like, oh, he's just being quirky. That's Bill Murray. But if it were anyone else, you'd call the cops on him. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like that era at all. I watch it for Garrett Morris, honestly, which is like, let's see what they gave the black guy to do. But other than that, like, basically, when you get past that terrible, like, Eddie Murphy Piscopo era, because everybody knows Eddie Murphy came from SNL, but the thing most people don't know was that SNL wasn't at its strong point at that. Like, Lauren was gone. So it's like Eddie didn't have to try hard. He was just very funny in a very unfunny show. So it's when Lorne comes back, because I've done my history on SNL. I've read the books from various cast members and the like oral history. And it's when Lorne comes back in like the late 80s where the ball gets rolling, and that happened to be when I hopped on. So like from then on is my SNL. But anything prior to that, like the Robert Downey Jr. season or like the Julia Louis-Dreyfus season, none of that happened. It's all retconned in my head.
Yeah, so people laid the groundwork. It worked for that generation, but definitely that original cast, we cannot relate. Like, it's a different sensibility altogether. But the other thing I want to ask you about is, I know you have a performance background of sorts. It was literally my goal in life to be on Saturday Night Live someday throughout high school. Like, that's what I would tell everybody. Like, oh, what are you going to do after you graduate? I'm going to get into sketch comedy. I'm going to be on Saturday Night Live. And I can admit, though, that I was the epitome of peaked in high school. I mean, on several levels. Like, I went from the fat kid everybody picked on in elementary school and junior high to being voted homecoming king my senior year. But then I'm speaking specifically about high school theater because I got the lead in all the plays. I was the darling of our drama department. But then I gave up on that dream after I graduated. I didn't do theater in college. I didn't have like that fire or the determination to face rejection by professionals that would tell me I didn't actually have talent, because I'd been getting accolades for my natural performance skills and not really trying or studying for 4 years. And so I knew I was a big fish in a small pond. But meanwhile, my friend Nassim Pedrad, who I did plays with, I wrote skits with for talent shows, I won drama festival awards with, she rarely got a lead role in anything. And I think she had a chip.
Pedrad?
Yeah.
My wife in Earth 784? How have we never discussed
I know. I knew this would be a bombshell for you. Like, but that was the thing. Like, I was the guy, and she was like our drama club president and stuff, and she would get like little bit parts that were funny, but like she just, I was like, why is she not getting cast? And then so she went to UCLA for theater. Then she joined the Groundlings. She becomes a cast member on Saturday Night Live from 2009 to 2014. She had a good run. In fact, you might remember she actually wrote and performed a couple sketches on SNL that were based on another hilarious classmate of ours. We did improv with her, but she never got cast in the school plays either. Her name was Sheldon. She actually like eventually got a show on MTV. I think she was writing for one of the fashion magazines. She was like an editor there or something. But then Nassim leaves SNL, stars in a Disney movie with Will Smith. Me, I do a couple fairly entertaining podcasts for a niche audience of pop culture nerds like myself. So we all have a calling, I guess. But I'm curious, Will, for you, did you have any ambition to be a comedy performer, to be on Saturday Night Live, to do anything like that?
This always becomes therapy. So I peaked in college. And so like that's our next podcast. But like I never got like class clown or anything. I always entertained my family, like at like parties and family reunions and doing like impressions and stuff. I'd have people like crying, and it's amazing seeing like a 50-year-old man cry because he can't stop laughing, that kind of deal. But I never really like, I don't know, I feel like they were easy targets. So like I never did any kind of performance thing. You have the standard like school plays like in elementary and all that, and I wasn't going out for anything. I would be like a fork or like something in the background. But then in high school we had to take drama. It was one of our electives, but like an elective's like when you have a choice. But like the teacher made all of her students audition for the shows. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I auditioned and it was for Hello Dolly. And I ended up getting one of the leads. I don't know if you're familiar with like Hello Dolly.
Yeah, so I know it only because Nassim and I, we went to school with this gal who, and she transferred our school for 1 year, then went back to Beverly Hills. So we went to go see her perform at Beverly Hills High School, their performance of Hello Dolly. But she was just in the chorus.
The ensemble.
Yeah, the ensemble. Like, you were the star at our school for the 1 year you came in. What happened? Anyway.
Yeah, like so I got Cornelius Hackle, and then it was like apparently I could sing, because like I was always kind of like shy of performance because my mom is very blunt. Like, she's not that encouraging person, like, oh, keep at it. She'll tell me now, like, I spent all that money on piano lessons for nothing because you can't play the piano. I can play Right Here Waiting or whatever if you give me sheet music, but I'm not that guy who can sit down in Nordstrom's and just start playing, like, that's what she wanted. So I was always embarrassed to kind of perform. So I was singing, like, NSYNC in my room, but, like, nothing with people. But I auditioned for this show, got it. Apparently, people thought I could sing. So then the next show was Pippin, and I got Pippin. And then like we kept doing these things. And then I like directed a show. This is like all throughout high school. So then when I go to college, it's like, okay, what now? And I kind of looked at the theater stuff, but like that's for like drama majors. And I didn't have that in my head, but I found a cappella. So I kind of put all the like acting stuff aside for a cappella, but I still wanted justification, if that could be like understood, like because I was kind of good in the acapella, but then I also stood out like a sore thumb because I was the black guy. Not a lot of black guys in acapella. There just aren't. I would get flack from like the black kids because I wasn't in gospel choir. So like not black enough for them, too black for everybody else. So like that was acapella for me. But there were times where they were like performing aspects Like I took drama in college as just like a random class, and my partner left to go do the real world road rules challenge. So that's my situation. So like the rest of that semester, I'm like, so who do I act with? So like when I graduated and came home, like there were little things I would try to like, am I funny? Can I act? And I wasn't getting any feedback that it was yes. Like my girlfriend, like junior year, was in the Schizophrenics, which I don't even know if they can call them that anymore.
Probably
But like
not.
they were like Cornell's premier sketch comedy group. And like I would hang out with them and like Saturday nights. This is where like the Twitter thing kind of started. Like Saturday nights, they would critique SNL. Like I'm used to just watching it, and they're like studying like the science of comedy. And so it's one of those deals of, like that's how I got it in my head. But it was like I was always trying to prove myself to these people. Like, am I funny to you? Like, does this make you laugh? And then when I graduated, I'm like, let's tie it all together. And I auditioned for the touring cast of The Lion King, and it was horrible. And I never looked back. So I don't even sing in my house anymore. There was a stint where I would do karaoke. Like people would come to town from college and we'd go to Georgetown and do karaoke. I thought like, oh, I'll sing lullabies to my kids. And my girls are like, Daddy, stop singing. So I don't sing anymore. I don't act anymore. I rant on podcasts.
Oh, well, you've got to send Will some fan mail here and get him singing for us. But it is heartbreaking, whether we do it to ourselves or other people, don't give us that encouragement. But, somewhere along the line, Will, people were giving encouragement to the world of sketch comedy, to the Fox network to see, hey, maybe you can fill a void that we don't know we have. So we got to find out how MADtv came to exist in a segment we call The Green Light. All right, so speaking of Saturday Night Live, it was far from the first sketch comedy show on American television, but having been broadcast on NBC for nearly 50 years at this point, it is definitely the longest running and has been the launching pad for countless comedy careers of some of entertainment's most memorable stars. They really do influence the humor around them. People like Chevy Chase and Bill Murray and Eddie Murphy and Mike Myers and Chris Farley, Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, so many more. But beyond just a program that aired comedy skits, despite a few of those rough years you mentioned in the 80s, SNL has been the nexus really of like all entertainment from a different A-list celebrity each week. They might be from film or music, sports, even politics. They will host episodes. High-profile musical acts can perform for maximum exposure. So it seems only natural then that this new Fox network would want to create their own pop culture flashpoint to help bring in more viewers on Saturday nights.
Yeah, the Fox network actually launched with sketch comedy at the forefront by giving the Tracy Ullman Show a big push during its first year of broadcast, and tried their hand a few more times with the short-lived sketch shows like The Edge and the Ben Stiller Show, but only really had an impact with the racially charged humor of In Living Color, which launched the film careers of Jim Carrey and the Wayans family. But once that show ended, Fox was looking for something to fill that space, and after the failure of John Leguizamo's House of Buggin', it just so happened that famous music producer Quincy Jones and TV producer David Saltzman had purchased the rights to Mad Magazine, and the pair decided to use the brand name of that long-running humor magazine as the basis for a sketch comedy series called MADtv. Adam, how many of these other Fox sketch comedy shows did you watch as they aired?
All of them, actually. Like, I know you were tuned in, and I was as well. I would say, with the exception of the Ben Stiller Show, I remember it being promoted, but it seemed like it was for like college students. It didn't seem wacky enough for me. It wasn't cartoonish enough. I just didn't get it, which I think a lot of America didn't get it. But I remember a parody of Beverly Hills 90210 that they did on The Edge, where in every scene, the Brandon and Dylan characters, their hair would get bigger. It was like taller and taller until at the end, they're like, hair fight! And they're stabbing each other with their hair. They're like ramming each other like bulls. And then like bloody wounds would appear on their chest. Like, it was hilarious to me. I'm like, what is this? But I loved and I taped House of Buggin' back in the day. Like
All 4 episodes.
exactly. It didn't last long, but there was a hilarious sketch that's always been in my brain. John Leguizamo, Luis Guzman, and the Latino gangbanger characters. That's what we called them at the time. Oh, gangbangers. But they go to see Star Trek Generations at a movie theater, and then they start freaking out when Kirk died. Luis Guzman is just like, no, Jim! Jam! It's so funny. And also, In Living Color was huge in my elementary school. We were quoting Homie the Clown. We love Fire Marshal Bill, I mean, obviously, 75% of that stuff in Living Color you can't talk about anymore. But I feel like that discussion may be fodder for a future episode. We might tiptoe around it. So I won't go into too much detail now. But were you tuning in for these shows?
Oh yeah, all of them. But to me, the only lasting legacy of like The Edge is that's where Jennifer Aniston came from. I mean, like a lot of people think of that like Ferris Bueller show, but like to me, I was introduced to Jennifer Aniston on The Edge. And it's just kind of funny to think that she thought she was going to try her hand at sketch comedy. Like I don't remember it failing, but I don't also remember it like succeeding. And I mean, like she's got an interesting pedigree with her dad on like soap operas and stuff, but like that's that to me. House of Buggin' stands out because it was probably the most offensive thing I'd ever seen during a period where we weren't really concerned about that. This is when like politically correct became like a phrase, but they weren't casting a wide net. But this was so like in the bullseye of like, I can't believe they just said that, And half the stuff, it was almost like, it's not virtue signaling, but like a lot of the stuff was like, it didn't even apply to me to be offended by. But there was stuff I'm watching on those like 4 or 5 episodes where I'm like, this isn't funny. This just feels like they want to see what they can get away with, And then like in Living Color, the beginning is classic as always. It lasted a little too long because in the end, the Wayans had pretty much moved on. And then if you're like in the sketch comedy ecosphere, it gets real interesting because Chris Rock had left SNL because he didn't think he was getting enough to do, and he defected to In Living Color. So then you've got this weird cast of like, okay, Chris Rock and then Anne Marie Johnson, who most people knew from In the Heat of the Night or What's Happening Now. You would never think of her as a sketch comedian, and she was already like 40 years old.
The guy who stood out to me the most when I knew it was going downhill was Jay Leggett. He was the fat guy, the fat white guy, yep. Jay Leggett. And I'm like, who is this guy?
Yep. It was basically the end of In Living Color was kind of the template for MADtv in terms of like, who the hell are these people and where did they come from? But over time, the MADtv people would prove themselves to us. Yep. That end of In Living Color did not.
There we go.
But yeah, I watched them all.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we've mentioned it. We got to get into it. Why is MADtv a thing? Well, we're going to give you the elevator pitch. So MADtv premiered on Fox on October 14th, 1995 and aired for 14 seasons on Saturday nights at 11 p.m. against Saturday Night Live. And the format involves sketches filmed in front of a live studio audience, as well as pre-recorded movie and music parodies, which focused on edgy topics, foul language, and a mockery of racial politics in the United States. I mean, that was just a huge point of comedy. In between the sketches, there were also animated versions of the Mad magazine comic strip Spy vs. Spy during the first few seasons, and the interstitials included stylized imagery of Alfred E. Newman, the mascot of Mad magazine. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the cast here?
Okay, well, the original cast consisted of Deborah Wilson, Nicole Sullivan, Phil Lamar, Artie Lang, Mary Scheer, David Herman, Orlando Jones, and Brian Callen. This initial cast only lasted for 2 seasons, after which new cast members, including Michael McDonald, Ari Spears, who both became the longest-running cast members, Alex Borstein, Will Sasso, Frank Caliendo, Bobby Lee, Keegan-Michael Key, Jordan Peele, and many more cycled through until the show's cancellation in 2009. Much like their competition, many celebrities of varying fame made cameos in sketches and hosted episodes, including Whoopi Goldberg, Claudia Schiffer, Halle Berry, Shaquille O'Neal, Bret the Hitman Hart, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Kiss, 98 Degrees, Snoop Dogg, and many more. So, how did you first discover Mad TV?
Well, I mean, it's like you were saying, when In Living Color is coming to an end, I'm still watching it. You know, it's not the same as it was, but I'm like, okay. And then it's over. And then I'm like, well, so what's going to happen? And I start seeing these ads for something called Mad TV that's going to come up. So 1995, Fox had my full attention. Any show they were going to put on the air, I was at least going to check it out. And obviously, the fact that I love sketch comedy, Mad TV was a no brainer. So I taped the pilot episode and I watched that endlessly. I would take it to friends' houses. I'm like, have you seen this show? Have you seen it? And I was getting it on the ground floor. It felt like my personal sketch comedy show, I guess, and so I started watching also at this time The State on MTV, and I loved it, but Mad TV had a more reliable time slot, so I watched it much more often, especially those first 2 seasons. But again, that pilot, I just watched and rewatched it. I recorded it onto an audio tape so I could memorize all the lines of the sketches. Like, I still know all the words to the rap parody song about Ice Cube and Ice-T selling out and being spoiled by Hollywood. And my favorite lyric will forever be, and this is just so perfect for our show, my agent's always saying you the best and the baddest. Then why not the uncle on Family Matters? I was like, it's the best. In fact, we had a 7th grade talent show that got canceled a few weeks before it was scheduled to happen. And I was so bummed because I had rewritten all the lyrics of the song to be a comedic reflection of attending our middle school, right? Like, it's going to be talking about how hard it is to be a student. Never got to perform it. That's probably for the best. Now that I look back on it. Like,
maybe some like Betamax floating around.
yeah. But like Orlando Jones, like they would do these monologues. And there was one in particular, like a phrase that I just use all the time. He was talking about meeting actors on the streets of LA and becoming incredulous when they claimed to not be characters that they played on their shows. He eventually has this wild declaration. He goes, "Poppycock, I don't believe it." That's how I always say it. But curious for you though, like Mad TV, you get on board from the start or did you find it later? What was the story there?
I was there from the start. My TV viewing's always been weird. I didn't have a remote control TV in this era. Like, I still had like a hand-me-down with knobs. So I tended to watch TV standing up, just like, because it was like on top of my dresser. And if something got to a commercial, let's see what's going on channel 20. So there were years where I'm switching back, like in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. NBC is 4 and Fox is 5. So I'm standing there switching between 4 and 5 all Saturday night, basically. So like I was there in the beginning, but I will say comedy kind of like ebbs and flows. And this was a golden age in a sense, because you mentioned The State. I've never seen The State. I know everybody who was a part of it. I've loved all their work afterwards. Never seen any of those episodes. Kids in the Hall was big. Don't get it. Watched it, don't understand it. At the same time, though, MTV or VH1, Comedy Central, one of those Viacom networks, they were showing Vacant Lot, which no one ever talks about. Vacant Lot is also a Canadian sketch show produced by Lorne Michaels around the time of Kids in the Hall. So Vacant Lot is basically the NSYNC to Kids in the Hall's Backstreet Boys. And I loved Vacant Lot, and it only lasted 1 season. But like as I mentioned in the past, I would spend summers taking care of my neighbor's pets and just like stay in their house. So like I watched all of Vacant Lot, and I try to talk to people about it, and they don't know what I'm talking about.
I've never even heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I watched all this stuff, but eventually I felt like SNL was stronger because like those new kids who had just started the season prior are like finding themselves and like they're really getting stronger. So I would say up until around like 98, 99, I'm an SNL person, but then the quality swaps. And Mad TV, no one wants to admit this. Chad and I talk about this all the time. There's a run where Mad TV is running circles around SNL, but like it never got its proper credit because like the cameos we mentioned, it used to be a thing in pop culture. There were 2 ways you knew you had made it. A, you get mentioned and or get to host SNL, and B, you get to be on The Simpsons. Like that was it. Like you knew like, wow, I'm finally seen as a celebrity because I get to like voice something on The Simpsons or get to host SNL. But then you got MADtv where it's like Claudia Schiffer. You know, it's like she's pretty. She's not known for her acting. MADtv was the kind of show where it's like they're gonna make a big deal that Carmen Electra showed up, and you know, like that was their demographic because it was teenage boys. But Carmen Electra never has and never will host SNL. So there was kind of like a status difference there, you know? But like, I think the only thing that really brought me back to SNL was when Keenan started, because Keenan's that legacy guy where it's like, hold up, the guy that we know from all that? Oh, it's like this now? He's graduated to sketch comedy PhD level? And then I've stuck with it since he's been back. So I missed those like final terrible years of MADtv. So like just kind of ebbs and flows.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, yeah, it's one of those shows like you were mentioning before, just the legacy of the people who were on that show and what they went on to do after the fact is pretty impressive. Like these are, you know, some of them, they're kind of only known for MADtv. There's a few of those, but there's some highlights there. And they would, a lot of times they would get like guest spots. Like I remember Nicole Sullivan, I think she was on like an episode of the Drew Carey show. And I was like, what is this? Like, I'm so amazed, you know, to see her there. You know, but obviously voice acting careers galore and a lot of stuff. So we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we discuss our cheers. So just real quick, I always like to just mention the theme song to start things off, because if you can get a good theme song, it's going to grab people, it's going to get their attention. And the hip hop beat of this style of MADtv, did Heavy D do this one just like he did in Living Color? Yeah. So it was very similar in that way, but like the vocals on everything, I'm sure you're like, you pay attention to the harmonies on the, you are now watching MADtv, you know, like that still rings in my head all these years later. But it also, just the nature of it gave it like kind of a manic urban feel as opposed to SNL, which was so slick, jazzy, like yuppie music. And like it just never felt cool, like saxophone music, you know?
Don't you besmirch G.E. Smith in the Saturday Night Live band.
But it set the stage, like you never knew what kind of sketch was coming up next on MADtv. Like even the main set initially, it was a weird mishmash of architectural styles. It'd be like hardwood floors, but then Roman columns, and then a 60s TV set, and then exposed brick. Like it gave you an aesthetic that you kind of felt comfortable, but you also felt confused, which I think is like the perfect setting for comedy and to be ready for laughs, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing that's always funny to me, we talk on here a lot about like the Fox like feel and like what made a Fox show then. And what's interesting about MADtv, it was produced by Warner Brothers, but they clearly got notes on like, how do you make this a Fox show? Like the set, it's almost as crazy as like the stud set we discussed.
Yeah.
You know, like they understood the assignment. To me, and a lot of this is probably like in hindsight, but I felt like I probably felt this way then. MADtv's legacy is the characters, the recurring characters. I can't really tell you off the top of my head a random, just like non-celebrity focused MADtv sketch. I can't. But if you want to talk about Stewart, if you want to talk about the Van Combe lady, if you want to talk about Miss Swan, we can do that all day. Meanwhile, like SNL, once like Farrell and Sherry O'Terry and Molly Shannon, all those people move on, SNL has struggled to create recurring characters. Like in recent years, they've really tried, but it's too much too soon. They've got one right now, Lisa from Temecula, who's just this like middle-aged black woman who will just say what she wants to and do what she wants to. And it's funny because she has no boundaries. The first sketch was amazing. The second one they rushed out like 3 months later. And you're like, oh, they're trying to make fetch happen. And then like recently they did a third one. And I'm just thinking like recurring characters might not be like outside of Weekend Update. It's not really their strength right now. But that's where MADtv excelled. Like there are people out there, they probably don't know Michael McDonald's name because we all automatically think of the blue-eyed soul-singing Santa Claus, but they know Stewart. You know, like
Yeah.
they know that character. I think that was his strength and his legacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. With SNL, I feel like once Kristen Wiig left, like recurring characters just weren't going to happen for anybody else. But like the female performers on Mad TV were a powerhouse. Like I had a crush and also admired Nicole Sullivan. Like I loved her Van Comb Lady sketches, partially because my mom was a big customer of Lancome, who they were parodying. We would spend so much time at the counter in department stores that I'd be bored out of my mind. So when I saw that first sketch, I was just like, oh, this is very familiar to me. Now, less familiar, luckily, was like the bigoted attitudes of the Van Comb Lady, but they came on very strong in that, you know? That's when I always get her fired at the end of her sketches, right? But like, she had the first catchphrase on Mad TV, like, yeah, you know what? You know, la 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 la. Like she was the breakout character initially. Then there was, you know, great follow-up sketches. There was another one where she was like a receptionist at a hospital. And I just always remember Deborah Wilson brings in Phil Lamar. He's just like bleeding profusely, and she explains that he's a hemophiliac. And then the idiotic Van Comb Lady, you know, says she can't treat him because, you know, we here at Sisters of Mercy don't condone that lifestyle choice. You know, like. So it's just like, but Nicole Sullivan, she was great. Like she could do impressions. She did a great Meg Ryan. She's the one I always thought like she's going to go do something. And she really didn't. It was like Mad TV and that was kind of it.
Yeah, I got more on that in Cheers.
Okay.
So we got to talk some more Cheers.
We do. Well, let's talk a few more cast members here because to me, Phil Lamar is the superstar. He was just so versatile, like his impressions, his original characters, like the UBS driver instead of UPS, right? Like he was this delivery guy. He's basically like a hyped up surfer dude character, deliver packages to Everson. Okay, all right, hey, that's all right. You know, like he had a good vibe going there. He always could play like the good, like stuck up intellectual or exasperated person who's being harassed by somebody else's character. You know, like he could be a utility player that way. But I gotta say, you gotta tell me if you remember this one. My favorite sketch of his was a solo performance he was this extremely lonely guy. He's all by himself in his apartment that's made up to look like the apartment on Friends because he's imagining he is on an episode of the show and he has all this one-sided banter with the entire cast of characters. No, Phoebe, not actually, you know, and stuff like that. And then he pretends to be surprised that the group has remembered his birthday and they've gotten him a cake. And then ultimately imagines himself making out with Monica, Rachel, and Phoebe all at the same time. But he gets interrupted because he has to watch the latest episode of Friends. Like, it's masterful. This one-man show. And then, of course, like, he goes on to do all this, like, you know, voiceover work. And that's what most people know him for now, you know. But, like, he would always pop up in shows and I'd be like, Phil Lamar's here. Like, I loved everything he did.
I forgot about that, but you really just brought it back, you know? Like, the original cast is stacked. Nicole Sullivan, from what I read, they said that she was brought on because they wanted someone on the cast that, like, America would want to, like, hang out with, basically. Like, she seemed to be that approachable. Because like you were saying, like, at this point, SNL is it's a New York humor. Like, they're very sophisticated. These are people who, like, drink champagne and that kind of, and, like, the cast here has said ratings basically showed us that our audience was teenage boys in the Midwest. So that's what we catered to. It made it more accessible, and you kind of see that based on, like, where a lot of these people ended up. I mean, like, yeah, Phil Lamar, he's now, like, a voice acting great. But then it's like Artie Lang, he goes on to, like, the Stern crew, or like Brian Callen, he's in the Rogan crew now, that kind of deal. So it's just like they found themselves, audiences found them, and that's kind of what carried them to their next phase. But like one thing that really helped me appreciate the show, but like make it more familiar to me, was when a lot of the people did more than Mad TV. It's like Orlando Jones was also the Sprite guy, you know, or like the biggest one to me is Alex Borstein, in that she's doing Mad TV during the original run of Family Guy. You know, so it's just kind of like, I'm learning about this new show that everybody thinks is trying to be The Simpsons and it'll never last, while she's on this other show that everybody thinks is going to be SNL and it'll never last. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, I like seeing people in multiple places for that familiarity to grow.
Yeah, they were actual like working actors. So they would pop up in all sorts of like movies and other TV shows. And you're just like, okay, they have the talent. Other people are seeing it. I will say though, because I was so dedicated to that early cast, like David Herman, I thought was great, and like just everybody, like when like half of the original cast was gone by season 3, for a moment, I was like, well, I'm not going to watch this anymore. It's not my guys. But then Will Sasso came on and I was like, oh, a new funny big guy who does impressions, like, oh, I'm in. Like I loved his insane Kenny Rogers, like he's mocking Steven Seagal. That's one of the things that has aged very well. Mock him all you want, but I felt like he really carried the series for a long time. He was kind of like the breakout after that initial group. I mean, sometimes he leaned too heavily into Chris Farley physical style, like screaming, rampaging madman humor, but he could really do subtle character stuff, which I loved. Like he'd do James Lipton, or I think he did a lot of Sopranos jokes. He did a lot of James Gandolfini, right? So
It's also like in the later run, it gets interesting too, because like when the show would come back, you never really know which Will Sasso you're gonna get. Like in the beginning, he's the Farley insert, but then his like weight starts fluctuating.
yeah.
So some seasons you come back, you're like, Will Sasso's kind of looking good right now, And then it's like 2 seasons later, it's like, oh, Will Sasso got that bonus check. So it's just like, yeah, you just never knew. And I felt that like the weight loss was also kind of like a professional move, because then it expanded the range of characters they were giving him, Like it wasn't just like John Madden, even though he's still taking that to the bank thanks to Fox Sports.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see when somebody's on TV for that long, and you're like, wow, okay, you kind of go on the journey with them. Now, you mentioned Miss Swan, who probably is like the greatest creation of that series. Like she got over 40 sketches. I mean, and Alex Borstein wasn't really there that long. So it just tells you how popular she was. Like, now the thing is, I think all of us assumed at the time that Miss Swan was like an Asian stereotype character. And obviously, oh, you can't do Miss Swan anymore. It hasn't aged well. But if you research,
I know where you're going here.
Alex Borstein's basing her performance on the eccentric Icelandic music icon Bjork. Like there's a Kenny Rogers duet sketch where she appears as Bjork, and it's basically a proto Miss Swan. So like the whole thing, he looked like a man, and yeah, okay, like that's just like foreign lady voice.
Right. She says, and I part of me feels like this is a retcon.
Yeah.
Because the show got a lot of flack from Miss Swan, and I'm sorry, like we can say it was a different time. Like I laughed like hell at Miss Swan, and I still do. I love that character.
Yeah.
But I feel okay about it now with her half-assed explanation because she says Miss Swan was not Asian. That Miss Swan actually hails from Corazia, which is apparently the home of Santa Claus, and that the character was a hybrid of her Hungarian grandmother and Bjork. So then you look at it and you're like, okay, I could see that, but why didn't any of this come out when like the Asian Defamation League, all this stuff, like all these groups came after the show, and I don't know if the show even responded, but it was a hot button like character.
Yeah.
But it is the legacy of MADtv.
It is. Well, and there is a sketch where she's in customs and they ask her, where she hails from, and she gives the country of origin, and that's where she says, where Santa Claus lives and all this stuff. So I don't know how far into it that was that, all the drama was happening, but she does officially explain it that way on the series so people can hear it at least.
She's been brought back recently. That's what surprised me. She did like a video for the 2016 presidential campaign. So clearly she felt like the heat was off, or maybe she thought we were buying the explanation, but this isn't one of those things we're burying in the desert with those ET cartridges.
Yeah.
Like she's still flying that flag.
Yeah. Now, I mean, obviously you brought up Michael McDonald as well. Now, he was on it forever and he would play a lot of characters, but yeah, Stewart is the only one people remember. But I always say Stewart doesn't work unless he has Mo Collins as the mom. Stewart, sucking on a monkey's teeth, like
Mo Collins is awesome, and she punches that whole concept up, but I'm good with Stewart by himself, like after she leaves the show. Like because I think she had like set the table enough that like he was good to go. It would have been great if she'd stayed, but I'm good with any Stewart.
The other thing I just want to bring up, is there a celebrity host or a cameo that always stands out to you? Because like eventually they did start having like musical performances as well. Like it would kind of fluctuate back and forth. Like, do we do this regularly or not? It was just like, who can we get this week? Okay, musical performance, or big guests. Like obviously for me, the big one is Kiss. When Kiss was on Halloween 1998, that was a big one for me. But
I don't have one because, like, I feel when it comes to booking musical guests, there's like a pecking order. It was kind of like I was really into alternative in the mid 90s because that's all Conan could book. Conan wasn't getting Alanis, but Conan could get Weezer because Leno wasn't getting Weezer. So it's that kind of deal. So it's like MADtv wasn't getting who SNL was getting, and the SNL people were the people I knew. It was always just like this throwaway. I know you're into Kiss, but even then, they were on like a resurgence.
Yeah.
But that's probably the biggest musical name they got.
But also, even at their height, Kiss never played on Saturday Night Live. So as big an act as they were, that was never their thing. Although there's a great John Belushi sketch where he plays the security guard backstage at a Kiss concert, which is great. But like, I don't know if that was by choice or like, well, we're too big to be on this TV thing. But then they did the Paul Lynde special, so I guess not. So either way, yeah.
Who says no to Paul Lynde? We got to do that special. Like, I love that guy.
Oh, funny stuff. Well, you may love Paul Lynde, but did you love everything they were doing on MADtv? We gotta find out. So let's get into our jeers.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
All right, you teased us with one, Will, earlier. What was on your mind at that point?
My problem with the legacy of MADtv, and see, this is kind of like, because normally we look at like how the show was and like what was problematic, that kind of deal. I'm going to look at it like looking back, like the legacy of MADtv saddens me because even though that first, like, let's say 3 years was a stacked cast of people who are household names, as a whole, the franchise is filled with Sherry O'Terrys. And by that, I mean, Sherry O'Terry, you watch that era of SNL and you're like, surely she's getting an NBC sitcom. And like, she left and did nothing. I'm sure somebody's going to correct us on here, but it's like, as far as I know, I don't even know if Sherry O'Terry acts anymore. I sleep at night hoping she runs a daycare center because I've seen Rachel Dratch more than I've seen Sherry O'Terry, but I bring her up because she's almost like John Hamm to me. I feel like John Hamm has the worst agent. Like, he has never capitalized on Mad Men. And here, there's so many people, like, because even Nicole Sullivan, it's like you're saying she popped up somewhere. I know for a fact Nicole Sullivan had a talent holding deal at CBS, and they couldn't figure out what to do with her, which is why they added her to King of Queens. Like, in the middle of King of Queens, she's a dog walker that they hire to walk Jerry Stiller just so he can get, like, movement and activity. And it's like, it gives her something to do. It was a check, but they never maximized on it. Mary Scheer is the mom on iCarly, and not even Carly's mom, Freddie's mom across the hallway. Like, David Herman, after Office Space, I don't know what happened to him. Michael McDonald gets me because I get there's probably like brand confusion with the name. I think there's more to him than Stewart, and he does pop up mainly in like Melissa McCarthy movies and like bit parts, but I thought he was gonna go far. Aries Spears, who to date is the most famous person who followed me on Twitter until his account was banned. I mean, all of these people, like, it's just disappointing to the point that most people don't even realize that Key and Peele met there. They seem to think that like, oh, these guys probably like met in the Groundlings and then Comedy Central gave them a show. MADtv didn't know what to do with them. So it's just, I don't know if it was like, if they shared management or something, but I look back at MADtv as like this cauldron of potential that went nowhere. Where's Mo Collins? After like she did a bit thing in Parks and Rec, but Stephanie Weir, there is a long list. There's a murderer's row of cast members who Hollywood did nothing with. While like Chris Kattan, he did movies for a while. You know, it's like there was a period in time just being on SNL. Now, half the stuff was just like Lauren forcing you into his crappy movie, but like you could work. You could work just by virtue of having been on Saturday Night Live. That was not the case with MADtv, and it still bothers me. Like that, like it's just wasted potential to me.
Yeah, well, and I think, we say it lasted 14 seasons. You would think at a certain point it would have hit. It would have gotten the respect it deserved, and it never did. And I think part of that, this is my backhanded compliment that leads into a jeer, is that it was the perfect humor for a 13-year-old boy because it was generally lowbrow and insensitive, and what a teenager can understand is rebellious and shocking, right? That's what you say. You're just loud and you're offensive, but I don't think the majority of the skits hold up as a result, unfortunately, at least in the early seasons, especially. Like, it felt like humor that my friends and I would have created if we were given a budget. Like, I always expected professionals on television to have a little bit more class. Like, they were funny, but I didn't respect them the way I respected the Saturday Night Live cast members. And this is the era especially, like when I look back, a lot of stuff like Deborah Wilson and she and Nicole Sullivan had like this Latina duo they would like come back with a lot of times. And like this was the ethnic accents equal laughs era of comedy. That's what we were raised in. So 90% of the skits that like my suburban white friends and I were recording, that would be incriminating rather than funny now. The same goes for MADtv, except it was broadcast and it was saved. Like Artie Lang doing That's My White Mama. It's just hard. It's hard to watch because they explain in the fake theme song it was the most offensive sitcom on television. That's the point.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's the catchphrase of the era. Like that one, I'm not even going to repeat it.
you could also see the change happening because you mentioned the Latina. They usually work at a drive-through, but then when you get to the end of like the series, they bring on Angela Johnson, who then creates this character Bon Qui, who like the TikTok generation has kind of tapped into because for some reason she still does it. Like, I guess she created it, so like she has the rights to it, but like the reason I guess it's kind of okay is because they're like, well, she's actually Latina. You know what I mean? It's the same recipe, but we got some spicy ingredients for it. So like it was that era of you watch things change to like, okay, maybe this isn't so cool anymore. And I think that's when like the bloom was off the rose, because I don't think MADtv should ever be highbrow or anything, because that was the problem with like Tracy Ullman, is that that's what Fox wanted. We talked about this with like the several times, honestly. We're talking about like Married with Children stuff and Unhappily stuff, where Tracy Ullman was their gold standard, but Tracy Ullman didn't work for them. That's not what caught on. So they just kind of went with the flow, but that's ultimately what they would have liked. And I mean, MADtv wasn't going to do that either, but MADtv was more aligned with the Fox audience.
Yeah, definitely. They got the vibe of what people were tuning in for, but it's like even the audience, like the live studio audience, a lot of times you would hear them like wincing. You could hear the wincing and laughing out of discomfort. It wasn't like deep guttural laughs. It's like, oh, like it's just like people are uncomfortable. Like there's a skit Mo Collins does a Mary Poppins parody of A Spoonful of Sugar, but it's about hiring day laborers as magical beings who clean up the messes of these privileged white children, and the nanny is singing about the joys of employing illegal aliens. You're just like, you can't do this. Like, offensive doesn't equal funny, in all cases.
Right.
So, but like the other side too is that MADtv, right? Being mad, like they dealt with a lot of mental health issues in very insensitive ways. That was like the point of their characters. Like I remember very early, like Deborah Wilson did a sketch about the happy storytime lady, and she's reading stories to children at a library, but she had to explain them halfway through that she suffered from bipolar disorder. That's why she'd swing from manic giddiness to super depressed or angry. And it's just like, it's really hard to watch now, like the mockery of that. Even at the time, I was just like, that's not nice. Because like most sketch comedy characters, I feel, they're like obnoxious, they're narcissistic jerks, they're stupid loudmouths, but Mad TV kind of felt like it was punching down a lot of the time. Like, again, that was just like the kind of like, I know this crazy person in life, I'm gonna imitate them. You know, similar, like you might remember there was like this character named Edward who was like a kid. He'd either be like getting after school tutoring from a teacher, he'd be training at a fast food restaurant, but he can't focus and he can't seem to understand what's going on around him. He's always yelling angrily. He's like, why? I don't get it. I hate it. You know, like that was his thing. And everybody's laughing, but he's obviously developmentally disabled. Like he was very reminiscent actually of a special needs student at my junior high. So I was not okay with it even at the time. I was just like, and again, this is 2024 perspective. We got to go back to the 90s when we just, oh, it's a crazy character. We didn't always reflect this way, but it's just like a lot of it was focused on, okay, Nicole Sullivan characters a lot of times too. It's just like people who socially can't connect to the world. You know, they'd be diagnosed with something.
It's interesting you saw Mad like that, because that's kind of one of my jeers in that, like, I don't like what I consider bait and switch branding. You know, it's like you latch on to something because it has brand recognition, but whatever you're like selling isn't really aligned to it. That's here where it's like, growing up, I was more of a cracked person than a mad person, but I
Me
mean,
too.
they're basically the same thing.
Yeah.
But like, there was nothing about Mad here except for the Spy vs. Spy thing. And I find it interesting that like the only reason there hadn't been a Mad television adaptation prior to this was because William Gaines, who published Mad, he hated television. So they waited until he died. He died in 92, and then Quincy Jones snatched up the rights in 95. So it's like, even that kind of like skullduggery kind of like, this wasn't Mad. If the guy already hated TV, he sure as hell would have hated what they did on TV with his brand. And that's always kind of like rubbed me the wrong way, because like, I don't get the connection. I feel like it could have been called anything. I don't think Mad TV really helped it, because honestly, even like at this point in time, I don't think a lot of, like, especially the younger people, they don't make the connection, because Mad doesn't mean anything anymore. It's like National Lampoon. National Lampoon was a big deal. Like, if National Lampoon's Animal House, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, then National Lampoon started competing with American Pie for those like straight to DVD booby movies. You know, it's just a brand dragged through the mud, and I feel the same thing with Mad here. That's just one of my issues.
Yeah, it's just ultimately, I think it doesn't ever have a signature. It doesn't, like you say, it's a factory of talented people coming through, but they got to make it on their own. Like, it's not a launching pad for them. They're getting some exposure here, and if Orlando Jones can then go star in Evolution with David Duchovny, good for him, you know. But it's just like, it just doesn't feel like there wasn't such a thing as a Mad TV rub. You know, you didn't get something by being there.
I like that you call it a factory, because it's reminiscent of like, a lot of people don't know about this, but there's like articles about it now where there's like K-pop boot camps where like it kind of follows the Lou Pearlman model, where it's like, if you're pretty and you're kind of entertaining, you go to this boot camp and they will teach you to sing, they will teach you to dance, and eventually they will figure out the personalities and the needs to put a group together. And then you're under this like nefarious contract that doesn't allow you to do anything until the group is over, and they churn them out. And like Mad TV is a lot like that. Like, I think people like, they cut their teeth on the show, that kind of deal, but like they easily could have been working it in and out in a year, you know, like there was no rub, there was no boost from being on this show.
Unfortunately not. So the question becomes, you know, you've mentioned to me, and I just found out this is the case, that there was a revival of Mad TV recently. So somebody thought there was still some juice in there, but we got to figure out if we could revive the show as the Show Doctors. So, is there a perfect version of Mad TV? Is there something they could have done at the time, Will? Or do you think, is there a use of the word Mad TV? You know, just that idea that means something?
That's a good question in the sense that, yeah, there was a revival. It actually kind of got kicked off with the 20th anniversary reunion. And most people didn't see it because it wasn't on Fox. It was on the CW because Warner Brothers owns MADtv. But after the reunion, and like 19 cast members came back, but like it's mostly none of the ones you really want to see. Like, if we're just being honest. But then that led into a 2016 revival, lasted 8 episodes. To kind of break it down for you, none of the cast members have Wikipedia pages, and it's now been 8 years. So once again, there's no MADtv rub. And I'm gonna go as far to say it definitely ended when it should have. I don't think we should do the like show doctor of like, how do we keep it running? We don't need to do an SNL, because there were periods of SNL where it probably should have ended, but Lauren is stubborn, and what else are you gonna put at 11:30? But like with this situation, I always go back to the brand, like we're talking about, like with Mad. Not too long ago, kind of around this time, Cartoon Network brought MADtv that was animated.
Oh.
And they're short because like we all have like attention span deficit these days. So like everything on there was like 8 minutes, like a Bluey episode. But like the whole show would just be like these different vignettes, which were kind of like slice of life thingies that are sort of reminiscent. Look at it this way. It was a MADtv-ification of Robot Chicken. That's what it is. It's completely animated. It's not stop motion, but like you still see the ties to Mad Magazine. That's what you have to do today. You can't bring back the Mad that was before, and you can't do quintessential MADtv in 2024. I always hate when people say that, like, oh, you can't make Blazing Saddles today. You could. You could make peak MADtv today, but it's gonna get political and it's gonna get polarizing. Like, it is going to be prompted up by extremes, and then that's gonna taint the show itself. Because I mean, like, even looking at the people we've discussed, like that first season, Artie Lang, he's had his troubles, he has his fans, but his fans are like former or current Stern disciples. And then Brian Callen is Joe Rogan's best friend. So he's like anti-cancel culture. I'm moving to Austin so I have a steady job. So it's that kind of like, I could see MADtv coming back again, but it would be funded by like some of the most deplorable people and it would taint an already somewhat tainted brand. So I think to move forward, it's not a sketch show. It is more of what we got from that Cartoon Network show. So I kind of feel like I failed here because we usually breathe life into these shows, but sometimes the doctor has to call it. And like, that's what I'm doing here. The prognosis isn't good for this patient.
I mean, I see what you're saying. Like, I feel like for the acceptable version of what they were trying to do in a more modern era, like Key and Peele did that, because I was not watching the show when they were on MADtv, but like their stuff, they do amazing character work. Their skits were outrageous and they skirted the line of offensive without ever crossing it. They would address a lot of the same ideas, but not in a way that was like overt to where you're like, oh, this is for lowest common denominator. They were like a little bit smarter than most, and they would make you think. And I liked Key and Peele stuff, but yeah, I just think MADtv as a concept has to be rethought. And this is where I'm coming. You tell me what you think now. You take MADtv, and I think it becomes a weekly collection. So in the Mad Magazine style of, okay, you got this feature, this recurring feature, but you get comedy shorts from different defunct sketch teams. So it'd basically be like a revolving reunion show. So you'd be bringing back, surviving members of SCTV, The State, the Kids in the Hall, House of Buggin', Human Giant, The Birthday Boys, a more recent one. Like, you get these people together that have gone on to have careers elsewhere, but they do little skits together. And a lot of them do those like on YouTube channels and stuff like it, and they travel and do like touring shows. But again, that's not on TV though. those are live events. So it would just be under the banner of MADtv, but you're not following the pattern of SNL. You know, it's not being compared to that institution. You don't rely on a revolving cast of players who may leave the show as they get popular or languish there and never get popular. And I also think, you know, in that mix, it'd be wise to have at least one like up and coming comic duo or sketch group, whatever, and they get a spotlight segment each week to, you know, appeal to a new generation. You know, you get some YouTubers or whoever that actually are like legitimate performers, and so it's kind of a showcase show, but also has some nostalgia attached to it. That's what brings people in. But then you introduce them to new comedy as well. Like that's kind of how I think it could work.
So I guess my question there is, so when we're talking about like you're bringing back former like defunct groups, so are we saying like, okay, you're bringing Human Giant on as Human Giant, or are you bringing in Aziz and Rob and Paul, but they're now going to intermix with like Mark McKinney and Dave Foley and those guys, or are we still segregating?
My vision is like they go produce these things by themselves.
Good.
And then
Okay.
They're sending them in, and then it's just assembled as a variety show. You know, whether it's like, you know, a TV model where you're changing the channel or whatever it is. Now, I think it'd be interesting if every once in a while, like there's a crossover, like, cause I'm sure like some of the younger guys respect those older guys and they're like, they collaborate and they do a sketch, but no, it's just everybody puts together their own thing. You know, the Lonely Island sends something in and then it's there, you know, so.
I love that actually. That's a great idea. Because especially like people miss these older groups. Like I miss Human Giant. Like they all have gone on to bigger and better things. It's kind of akin to, they were doing this a lot during the pandemic, so it doesn't happen as much anymore. But when you would get sequels or like an additional episode of a show that's no longer on, where it was just an excuse to like get the cast back together, maybe over Zoom. Sometimes it worked. I mean, like Happy Endings did a table read of an episode we never saw, and that was awesome. Some of them didn't work. 30 Rock came back as NBC's upfront presentation, and it was the most heavy-handed GE corporate kind of like thing that Jack Donaghy would have put together. This is kind of like that. I would like to kind of see those groups. Like, what could they give us now? I was just worried about like pooling them, because then you get into like the chemistry factor.
Yeah.
And like these guys are from an improv background, but these guys are from a sketch background, and they don't mix even though the layman thinks they do, and things like that. But like, no, I love your idea, so I'm going to transfer this patient to your hospital.
Oh, well, this has really been a fun discussion. I know we both love sketch comedy, and there's so much more we could be getting into. I'm sure we'll revisit some other shows we loved in the future that we've talked about. The Dana Carvey show is on the docket for sure.
It could kind of be said that Dana Carvey caught a case of the Sherry O'Terry's. Just gonna leave it there.
All right. Well, next time around, we are going to be discussing what I would call kind of a forgotten 80s adventure series, The Fall Guy, starring Lee Majors. Now, obviously, it inspired the new Ryan Gosling film, but there's a whole history of trying to get that turned into a movie for decades. So this is going to be really interesting to not even revisit for me. I've never seen The Fall Guy. So
Never?
never. It didn't run in reruns. Like, I never saw it. So
That's where because I was too young when it was on network. So like I knew it from weekend syndication in like the late 80s, early 90s. Like I guess peak would have been like 1990 in DC. Again, it was on Fox 5. So like I love The Fall Guy. It has Marky Post before Night Court. It has Douglas Barr before, what did Douglas Barr do? He did that show The Wizard that I hope we talk about one day, about like the little person who makes toys but solves crimes. That like you can't find anything on the internet, but I swear CBS aired it for a full season. And like it's just, The Fall Guy's awesome. It's about a truck jumping over things. And I've said time and time again, my favorite genre of 80s programming is vehicles jumping over shit.
Well, this is going to be great. We're having a super fan and a newbie coming in on my perspective here. So this is going to be fun. So stay tuned. If you want to find out what we're up to, you can find me at Hoju Coolander on all the socials. Happy to talk TV with you. Will, how about you?
I am everywhere at William B. West and westweekever.com.
Yes, indeed. Well, until next time, we're changing the channel.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.